Every story hides a secret. Let's uncover it. The story begins with a team of explorers traveling through the South Atlantic Ocean. On their ship was David, a weather officer responsible for reporting weather conditions. They were heading toward an island located in the middle of the ocean. The government had sent David there to observe the island's changing weather patterns. He was supposed to stay on the island for about 1 year, collecting weather data throughout that time. After completing a year of data collection, he was expected to return. David was provided with a year's supply of food and all the necessary equipment. After several days of journey, they finally reached the island. Using a boat, they landed on it. The island was completely deserted, so empty that not even a bird could be seen. On the island, there was a lighthouse and a small house where David was supposed to live. Before him, another weather officer named Robert had stayed there. He had also lived alone on the island for a year, collecting weather data. Now, since Robert's duty had ended, David was sent to take his place for the next year. The old officer was supposed to collect the weather data and then return with Robert's ship. But when the whole team visited the house, they were shocked to find no trace of any human there. Inside the room, all of the old officer's belongings were scattered around. After seeing this, the captain and David thought that maybe someone was at the lighthouse. Without wasting any time, they headed toward it, and what they saw there was strange. The lighthouse was surrounded by sharp wooden stakes, as if someone had deliberately sealed it off so no one could enter. Captain and David knocked on the gate several times, but there was no response from inside. Finally, they pushed the gate hard and went in. Inside the lighthouse, they found a man named Gruner. When they asked him about the old weather officer, Robert, Gruner replied that he was dead. He had gone toward the sea and never returned. Hearing this, both David and the captain were stunned. After that, the captain turned to David and said, "If you still want, you can come back with us." But David refused to return. He thought that if he could provide the government with an accurate weather report of the island, he might earn a huge amount of money. After that, the captain handed him a dirty old gun for protection and said, "This place doesn't look safe to me. Take care of yourself." Then they left him there and sailed back, planning to return again after a year. Once the captain was gone, David arranged the house a little to make it livable. That night, while searching, he found a diary in a drawer. It belonged to the old weather officer, Robert. The diary contained a lot of information about the island. It also mentioned a mysterious creature, but the details were unclear and incomplete. David carefully read every line. The diary also had strange sketches of unusual animals. David couldn't understand why Robert had drawn them. Maybe he was lonely and did it just to pass time. On one page, there was even a photo of Robert's wife. After reading for a long time, David grew tired and slowly drifted off to sleep. The next morning, he started collecting weather data, but as soon as he reached near the sea, his steps came to a halt. He noticed that some stones were strangely arranged between the rocks, with shells placed among them in odd patterns. David thought maybe Gruner did this. With that thought, he returned to his work. While working, he looked from the Durgreen side toward the lighthouse and saw another person standing with Gruner. But in the blink of an eye, that figure vanished. When David tried to look again, he felt it must have been just his imagination. That night, while he was busy with his work, someone knocked on the door. He assumed it was Gruner. David called out his name, but no one answered. Holding a lamp in his hand, David walked toward the door when strange, unearthly sounds echoed in his ears. Then he saw a bizarre creature's hand reaching under the gate. It wasn't human at all. The sight froze David in terror. He immediately ran to the basement and hid there. Moments later, the mysterious creature managed to enter the house. It began searching for him, moving around in the shadows, while David peeked at it through a small crack in the basement wall. Because of David's sudden movement, the creature noticed him, quickly charged toward him to kill and tried to grab him through the crack. In panic, David immediately picked up a knife and stabbed it in the eye to save himself. The creature screamed and ran away, but David knew it could return any time. That moment confirmed to him that everything written in the diary about the creature was true. Terrified, he couldn't sleep the whole night. The next morning, when David stepped outside, he saw footprints in the sand that clearly didn't belong to any human. The tracks led straight into the sea and disappeared. Now David understood why Gruner had placed sharp wooden stakes all around the lighthouse. He realized that if he stayed in the house, the creature could kill him anytime. Scared, David ran toward the lighthouse and shouted for Gruner to open the gate and let him in. But Gruner refused, telling him he should have left with the ship. Disappointed and helpless, David turned back, knowing Gruner didn't want him anywhere near the lighthouse. Instead, Gruner poured water down on him. He told her to stay away. Now he had to handle everything on his own. David sealed every window of the house with wooden planks and surrounded the place with sharp wooden stakes. Outside the gate, he placed old papers and books, then poured oil over them so he could set them on fire if the creature returned, hoping the flames would scare it away. But there was one thing David still didn't know. and he was going to discover it tonight. Luckily, inside the house he found an old box. Inside it was a gun and plenty of bullets. Seeing this gave him a small spark of hope to survive. As the sun began to set, fear grew stronger in his heart. Soon, darkness covered everything. David sat quietly in a corner of the house with the gun in his hands, his heartbeat racing. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound. When he secretly peeked out the window toward the sea, it felt as if the ground slipped from beneath his feet. What he saw was terrifying. There wasn't just one, but many of those strange creatures rising from the water and moving toward him. Within moments, they all gathered and began trying to break down the gate. Without wasting a second, David opened fire. Some of the creatures fell and died. David thought that after hearing the gunshots they would get scared and run away, but instead, seeing their companions die made them even angrier. So David came up with a plan. He set fire to the papers and old books kept outside the gate. The creatures panicked at the sight of the flames and retreated back into the sea, but soon the fire spread to David's house. The wooden door caught fire, and slowly the flames began to spread throughout the house. David quickly wrapped himself in a blanket to save his life and ran outside, hiding behind a big rock near the lighthouse. While shooting at the creatures, his hand had already suffered a deep wound. Suddenly, heavy rain started to pour. The fire slowly began to die out, but even after raining all night, by morning David could not save his house. It had burned almost completely to ashes. Now, if David wanted to survive, he had no choice but to take shelter in the lighthouse. He grabbed his rifle, hid among the rocks near the lighthouse, and waited for Gruner to come out to fetch water. When Gruner finally stepped outside to collect water, David quietly followed him. But suddenly, a strange creature that was near Gruner attacked David. Somehow, David managed to overpower it. That creature was actually Gruner's protector. Just as David was about to shoot it, Gruner quickly stopped him and said, "Wait, this is my pet." David held back from pulling the trigger and used the moment to make a deal with Gruner. He said, "If you want this creature alive, then let me stay in the lighthouse. Otherwise, I'll kill it." Gruner agreed since David had plenty of food and gunpowder. Before evening, they both carried the remaining supplies back to the lighthouse and slept peacefully. The next morning, the creature was quietly licking David's hand. When David woke up, he saw that his hand had completely healed because of it. This surprised him greatly. David now wanted to learn more about the creature from Gruner and share it with the world, as it was nothing short of magical. He thought if they revealed the secret of this creature, both he and Gruner would earn a lot of money and fame. But Kroner didn't want any of this. He had no desire to leave the island. He had no one left in this world, and for him this island was perfect. A place where he felt like the king of his own world, free to do whatever he wanted. That's why he had written across many parts of the island, "Kroner is the ruler here." However, David couldn't understand why this strange creature was so devoted to Kroner. Then Kroner explained. Once, he had saved her life. She had accidentally gotten trapped in his fishing net when she was very young. Since that day, she stayed with him and began obeying everything he said. But Kroner was a harsh man. He treated the creature very cruelly. Every day, he forced physical relations with her. Kroner also admitted that once she had tried to attack him, but in return, he punished her so severely that after that, she accepted herself as his slave. And now you also understand why these creatures come out of the sea every night. They come only to rescue their companion from Kroner, but he never lets that happen. Those creatures could not attack in daylight because the sunlight burned their skin. David no longer wanted to stay there. He just wanted to escape the island somehow. As evening approached, Kroner told him to get ready with the gun, because the creatures could attack at any moment. They prepared to turn on the lighthouse light, and soon a huge number of creatures came out of the sea, moving toward the lighthouse. Kroner kept firing at them, but David was completely terrified. Instead of helping, he ran inside the lighthouse. Even though Kroner kept shouting at him, David just sat quietly in a corner. Within a short time, David fainted. Kroner was left to fight the creatures alone all night. The next morning, Kroner angrily threw water on David's face to wake him up. He told him, "If you want to stay alive, you must kill these creatures. Otherwise, I'll throw you out of the lighthouse. And from now on, you'll have to follow every order I give. Fetch water daily, do all the lighthouse chores, and guard with me at night." David had no other choice. He was forced to agree and started obeying everything Kroner said. But there was one thing he absolutely hated. Every day, the female creature, they were tortured in different physical ways throughout the night. Then both of them got ready again for guard duty, and once more the creatures rose from the sea. But this time, David wasn't afraid. He began firing at the creatures. However, Kroner did nothing. Instead, he locked the lighthouse gate, leaving David outside, and sat quietly inside so that David could learn on his own how to fight them. That whole night passed as David kept fighting until morning came. When Kroner opened the gate, he saw David sitting outside, covered in blood. David had finally learned how to fight those creatures. Time went on like this. Nights were spent battling the creatures, and days were spent helping Kroner with the lighthouse chores. For David, the island had turned into a kind of prison. He kept wondering when he would finally leave this place and breathe freely again. Over time, David formed a strange bond with the female creature. He started to feel sorry for her. He realized how hard it was to live alone after losing one's people. Perhaps the creature felt the same. David even gave her a name. Days kept passing like this, and then one day they noticed that the attacks from the creatures were slowly becoming less frequent. David thought maybe during winter they moved somewhere else, or perhaps they had realized that fighting these two was pointless. But Coroner told him that wasn't true at all. He said the creatures would attack again, and right now they were only increasing their numbers. A few more days went by in the same way. One night, after dinner, Coroner and David started playing chess to pass the time. But during the game, Coroner made a big mistake. They got so lost in playing that they completely forgot to turn on the lighthouse lights. Taking advantage of the darkness, the creatures launched an attack. I saw that their numbers were so huge that even the two of them together couldn't fight for long, and this time they had no plan. The bullets in their guns were almost finished too. Somehow, while trying to save themselves, they managed to reach the top of the lighthouse. But during the struggle, Coroner got a deep injury in his leg. That night, the creatures had clearly overpowered them. Both of them felt certain that death was near, but luckily morning arrived. As the sun slowly rose, the creatures left the lighthouse and disappeared back into the sea. After the scorching sun came out, Inerius tried to heal Kroner's wounds. But by then, David had already realized that they couldn't win this fight against them. Their bullets were almost finished, and they didn't even have enough food to survive for long. Luckily, the next day, while David was walking around outside the lighthouse, he spotted a ship in the sea. He quickly rushed inside to grab a flare gun and tried to signal the ship. But Kroner stopped him, as he didn't want David to leave. At that moment, Inerius attacked Kroner because she wanted to protect David from him. Kroner never wanted anyone to leave the island. This island was his own world where he lived like a king. He didn't want David to go either, because after being alone for so long, he finally had someone to talk to. And if David escaped, he would go back and tell everyone about Inerius and him. That's why David could not leave. Slowly, the ship disappeared into the sea before David's eyes. Now he had nothing left to do. A few more days passed like this. Kroner was still treating both David and Inerius badly, but he especially beat Inerius, which David really disliked. One day, David gifted Inerius a small toy boat that he had made from a fish bone. But when Inerius saw the toy, she took David to a hidden corner of the island where a real boat was kept. When David asked Kroner about it, Kroner admitted that he already knew there was a boat on that part of the island. He explained that some people once tried to save themselves by coming here in a boat, but before morning none of them survived. The creatures had killed them all. They had been carrying weapons and explosives on their ship, but a storm sank it near the island. Hearing this, an idea struck David. They had something like a diving suit, and David suggested that if one of them wore the suit and went to the place where the ship had sunk, they might be able to find some bullets or dynamite, which would make it easier to fight the creatures. But Kroner refused to accept it. David, however, was ready to risk his life to do this task. A few more days passed like this, and during that time, David and Inerius developed a deep bond. David had started to like her. While they were sharing romantic moments, Kroner secretly watched them. He began to feel that Inerius would take David away from him, so he decided David must be removed. The next day, Kroner pretended to agree with David's plan. He told him, "All right, you will wear the suit, dive underwater, and collect as much RDX as you can. Then I'll pull you back up with the boat." But Kroner's real intention was something else. He wanted David to bring up the dynamite boxes hidden deep under the sea, and then abandon him there so the sea creatures would kill him. This way, Kroner would get the dynamite for himself, and Inerius would once again become his slave. Both of them set out in the boat and reached the spot where the ship had sunk. David put on the diving suit and went down into the sea. Once he was underwater, he saw that the ship was completely destroyed, but luckily he found a few boxes of dynamite. Just then, some strange creatures suddenly appeared in front of him. The moment David saw them, he panicked and fell down. The diving suit was so heavy that he couldn't even move, and he wasn't able to send any signal to Kroner. Kroner thought those creatures had already killed David, but in reality, they were just two little kids. Somehow, David managed to take off his diving suit and reach the surface. There, they discovered some old boxes filled with dynamite. After that, both of them got to work. They set up dynamite in 2 layers around the lighthouse so that the next time the monsters attacked, they could wipe them out in one strike. Months passed, and the snow season arrived. But once again, the creatures disappeared. The attacks suddenly stopped, almost as if the creatures had sensed that a trap was waiting for them. Kroner began to suspect that Inerius had warned the creatures, so he started torturing him. But David stopped him, and in the end, the two of them made a new plan together. The main gate of the lighthouse was left open so that when the creatures came closer, they could be blown up with dynamite. Acting cleverly, they told Anarius to scream from the top of the lighthouse. Hearing his voice, all the creatures became furious. When the creatures saw that the main gate of the lighthouse was open, they thought it was the perfect chance to rescue Anarius. But in reality, it was a trap for them. Within moments, the creatures began to emerge from the sea. They rushed straight toward the main gate and attacked David as soon as they entered. David fought bravely and managed to escape from the creatures' grip. As soon as all the creatures gathered near the lighthouse, Kroner pulled the dynamite lever. But the blast didn't happen. David had already disconnected the wire, and Kroner forgot to reconnect it. David immediately rushed upstairs and began fixing the dynamite connection. Meanwhile, the creatures tried climbing the lighthouse, and Kroner was the only one holding them back. As soon as the connection was complete, David triggered the first layer, causing a huge blast that destroyed many of the creatures. But still, many monsters were ready to attack the lighthouse. Because of this, Kroner triggered the second layer blast as well. Both of them fainted in the powerful explosion. The next morning, when they regained consciousness, they saw that Unrias was gone. Dead creatures were scattered everywhere from the blast, and Kroner was killing the ones that were still alive but badly injured. At that moment, David noticed a necklace hanging around the neck of one dying creature. Seeing it suffer, David felt pity and realized his mistake. The creatures he had always thought of as dangerous were actually just like humans. They couldn't speak, but they had feelings. For Kroner, though, none of this mattered. From that day on, the creatures never attacked again. But every night, the sound of crying could be heard from the sea. David still didn't know how much damage they had caused, how many families were torn apart, how many children lost their loved ones, just because of one misunderstanding. The next day, David saw some small children of those creatures in the sea, the ones who had lost their families. He made a circle of stones on the shore and placed a small toy boat in the middle of it. The NRS people looked at him and then went back. David waited for many hours, but they never returned. The next morning, after waking up, David saw Kroner sleeping. Beside him were some old belongings, including an old photograph. As soon as David looked at the photo, he was shocked. The girl in the picture was the same one he had seen in Officer Robert's diary on the first day, and she was none other than Kroner's wife, with Kroner standing next to her. The truth was that Weather Officer Robert, who had come a year earlier, was not dead. Instead, he had changed his identity. Kroner was actually Robert, but he had taken a new name because he never wanted to leave the island again. After realizing this, David also lost hope that he would ever escape the island. The next evening, when David went to the shore, he noticed that the small boat kept inside the circle was gone. In its place, he saw a baby creature holding the boat in its hands. To show that he did not intend to fight or harm anyone, David threw a burning piece of wood into the circle, hoping they would understand he meant no danger. He wanted to be friends with them. Soon after, NRS emerged from the ocean waves, followed by the entire group of creatures coming out of the water. This time, however, no one attacked David because they also wanted peace. Their only goal was to find a safe place for their children. But then Kroner arrived holding a gun. He wondered how he could feel on top if peace prevailed. David tried to explain to him that the creatures did not want to fight. They only wanted peace. But Kroner refused to listen to anyone. He shouted at Anarias to go inside, but for the first time, she ignored him, no longer his servant. Seeing this, Kroner realized that his reign over the island was over. He began to feel weak inside, as no one obeyed his orders anymore. Angrily, he walked toward the lighthouse. David thought that perhaps Kroner would finally understand that every living being wanted freedom and that no one wished to live as a slave. But the idea of losing his kingdom would not leave Kroner's mind. When he reached the lighthouse, he fired a flare from his signal gun. One of them went straight and collided with a creature's child. The child died instantly. All the creatures ran away in fear, and Anarias also lost all trust in David. Furious, David immediately ran toward the lighthouse. He confronted Kroner, demanding, "Why did you do all this?" These beings only wanted peace, but Kroner had become so violent that he decided to kill David. Holding an iron rod, he was about to strike when David called him by his real name and said, "Stop, Robert. You're not a killer." Hearing this, Kroner froze. The truth was, Robert had never been a cruel person. After arriving on the island and living alone, his mental health had deteriorated. Loneliness, the death of his wife, and deep depression had turned him this way. He was never truly a killer, he was a good person. Kroner realized that the creatures never wanted to fight. They only sought peace. He had only attacked them to feel powerful. Now aware of his mistakes, he surrendered to the creatures, and they killed him within moments. David locked himself inside the lighthouse, and time passed. A year later, a government officer arrived on the island with a new weather officer assigned to monitor the area. When the captain asked David about the previous officer, David simply repeated that he had gone toward the water and never returned. The weather officer suspected that David himself was Kroner, but David didn't correct the misunderstanding. He quietly went to the balcony and stood there, saying nothing. For now, he too didn't want to leave the island. Meanwhile, the NRS family was happy. They no longer feared someone like Kroner and could live freely both on the island and in the sea. And with that, the story came to an end. Hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, give it a like, share it with friends, and subscribe so we can uncover more secrets together.